All right. Welcome to Navigating the New World Order. I will let a few of you in. We have quite many in the audience today, which is great, from all over the world, from Europe, from Brazil and the US and Canada, Mexico. We have some South America, in Colombia. So it's great. It's ticking up now. That's fantastic. While we do that, I would like to launch a poll. So at the screen now, you will have a poll, or you can pick it up from below on the screen, where I would like you actually to go in and vote while we're waiting for the rest of the folks. What does post-corona mean to your business? Will it be that we will work in new efficient ways, or is it that we will entering a short recession, a long recession, or maybe policy reliefs? Data privacy law will be maybe not invalid, but at least changed and mitigated. More business, less traveling. It's a lot of answering coming up here. That's great. Continue to answer. So go to the poll at the bottom of the screen, click on it, and I will share the result with you in a few seconds while we wait for the rest of the people signing up. We have people from, last time I counted, I think it's 15 different time zones all over the world. So that's fantastic. It's sticking in more answers and more people now. So hang on, folks. All right. So I give it a few more seconds. So do the last voting here. And we can see that new way of working, more global remotely. We have more business opportunities coming up here. More local production. It's not that high. A few people answer that. So let's see what's happening here. Less traveling is no one saying. That's interesting. All right. So we give it a few more seconds and then we start with today's call. All right. So I will now end the poll and share this result with you guys. And it's quite interesting to see that the top result is a new way of working. And that's also quite much in line with our analysis we made. And we have work more remotely and globally, more business opportunities. And I think this goes quite well together with what we believe too. When it comes to long or short recession, we don't know. No one knows. It's interesting to see the response here. It's not especially high. So our take is that it will be a new way of working and a new world order. And that's also why all of you signed up here for today. So let's jump into the presentation then. We have, as Innovation 360, been able to build up the largest database in the world with the data from more than 5,000 companies in 105 countries, where we have 360-degree data, which we use to analyze actually how do an organization organize and respond to change. And we divide it into ability and aspiration. And based on that, you can actually learn and create a much faster and adaptable organization. And by doing collective studies, we can learn tremendously much. And you can learn more than just looking at one competitor. So a good friend of mine, a Hollywood screenwriter, he always says that, you know, there is only two stories in the world. And it's either you go on a journey or a stranger come to town. And the question here is that, is innovation happen to you, or do you happen to innovation? The same goes with the virus. Is Corona happening to you, or are you happening to Corona? And that's the mindset you need to have to be able to cope with this extraordinary, epic, I would say, turbulent times. Not long ago, a few weeks ago, here in New York, where I'm based, they actually gave blood plasma with antibodies to treat people that were really bad. That's quite interesting. That's not to find for the test kits or try to find the perfect combination of existing medicines. It's actually to do something that has been done before. This were actually done during the Spanish flu. It's 100-year-old wisdom. And that's the mindset you need to have. You need to figure out what could you do, and you need to look both backward and forward and try to figure out what is the most important, that you can take control or that you're a victim. And that's the mindset to actually be able to cope with these enormously turbulent times and also come out on the other side as the winner. More as examples, during World War II, there was a metal shortage. And it was quite critical. And in 1942, citizens scored their homes, farms, businesses for metal. And housewives donated pots and pans. Farmers turned in equipment. Children even sacrificed their metal toys. There are only two stories in the world. Either you win the war or you lose the war. And it's always come back to that you have to take control and find totally different solutions. And here's the thing, you can organize for that. So Joseph Schumpeter, and the one that knows us quite well knows it's or really like our favorite. It's a role model when it comes to innovation and handling exceptional change. He said back in the 1800th century that innovation is the creative destruction where entrepreneur combined existing element in new ways. And everybody's talking about innovation, but very few organized to actually drive innovation. According to our data, only 10% has aligned the capabilities with the aspiration. So it is a discipline needed to do this, and that's exactly what we will be focusing on this call. So if you would like to post something in the chat, you're more than welcome. If you would like to post something in the Q&A, please do that. I have my friend and colleague Johannes Jarl on the call, and he will take care of the chat box, and he will take care of the Q&As, and you can post any kind of questions or go direct into the chat if you like to during the call, and we're happy to pick it up. So Johannes will answer it or send it over to me. And at the end, we will have some spare time as well to pick up a few of the questions from the today's call. So innovation could either be incremental, which means in small steps, or it could be radical, which means big leaps. And right now, we are actually seeing radical change, which call for radical innovation. It's just to look at the ventilators. You can't just reach out to GM and say, hey, you need to produce more. They have still not been able to increase the volume especially much. Why? Because they're not organized for it. They can't from one day to another triple or quadruple the production is simply not doable. So if they had the right capabilities and the right leadership and the right culture in place, they would be able to do that. So, and this is very typical for many large corporations. And to be fair, well, short term, it might be good to be organized for incremental innovation, which means continuous improvements. What we have seen is that companies that over time grow and are very profitable, they're able to handling both. So Elon Musk reached out and built ventilators in the speed of light. At the same time, his companies are not especially known for incremental innovation or efficiencies. So I will give examples how you can combine these things, and also what's happening when you put pressure on the system and how it actually changed pretty quickly. We have seen 5 top blockers in our data, and I'm going to examine them together with you one by one. And those blockers are hindering us from responding to change, to big change. Instead, we're focusing on yesterday and we recreate yesterday, and we're pretty happy with that until something happens like the pandemic we are in right now. But it could be the climate change, or it could be a dropping oil price. We will see turbulent times, and we better get ready for organizing for that for the coming 50 to 100 years. That's obvious, and just by reading the history, we'll see that pattern. That pattern has been possible to foresee, not the pandemic in itself, but the pattern. So if we have a look at the 5 top blockers, and we published a scientific paper back in 2018, where we actually described how we come to these conclusions. And we start with the first one, the silo. If you work in silos, that will effectively hindering you from being able to rapidly find a way of coping with something new, a new product, a new service, a new production line, a new process, a new business model, a new way of leading, a new way of operating. And lack of faith in the objectives is the same thing, that typically hindering you from actually being able to really go the extra mile and get other people to do that too, because you don't simply believe it's possible. The higher purpose is the same, that motivating people, and it make you to maybe to do sacrifices that you wouldn't do otherwise. So you need to believe in the objectives, and you need to have a reason or a cause for doing it, and you need to work with other people. And you also need to let go of the fear of failure. We have a question here, if there will be a copy of the slides. Yeah, everybody will have an email afterwards, and you can reach out to us and ask for a copy, and we will do our best to answer your questions. And we will record. No, we don't record our webinars. You have to sign up for the webinars. The whole idea is to have a live event and also be able to pick up question and answers. So instead, signing up for all our live events. So the fear of failure is hindering us from really being able to find solutions. Like, for instance, with protection in the corona situation right now, where we actually, in many countries, not using protection because we fear that the protection is not suitable. Then it might be better to have like a bad protection, basically. And also dealing with uncertainty is something that we know is effectively hindering to cope with radical change. So what we have done is that we have actually done a study on what happened when you put enormous pressure on a system, like the COVID-19 situation for different regions in the world. How do they start to act? The fantastic and interesting thing here is that when you put enough pressure on the EU or the US or on China, they start actually to behave like radical innovators. But the casualties, the price is way too high. It doesn't have to be like that. We could be prepared way in advance. Now the price is way too high, monetarily, humanity, and most likely, a lot of other things as well. But especially when it comes to human suffering and economic suffering, and economic suffering will also cause human suffering in the future. So it's not just now, it's also future suffering. So the price is way too high. It doesn't have to be like that. The important thing is that each and one of you leading your corporation or your institution or your universities on this call, you can prepare. You can prepare for post-corona. It is possible, and I will show you how to do that on an overall level based on science and data. So if we have a look at the early stage of COVID-19 in EU, no one helped. EU didn't help China. EU didn't help Italy, that is a part of EU. And in the US, they didn't reach out for any kind of support whatsoever. And in China, they held back information. They broke all, this is the absolutely perfect silo behavior. Nope, we are here and we protect our citizen and we don't care. But maybe we have to look at the systemic, because the disease will spread. So under enormous pressure, it was changed. EU started to collaborate in a way they have never done before. In US, the federal support reached out, which never happened normally. And in China, they start to release information to people. They actually opened up for collaboration. They gave away the DNA of the COVID-19 virus. It was a tremendous change in start to collaborate because they were forced to. If we have a look at faith in objectives. So in the early corona curve, EU were very protectionistic, and they didn't have many scenarios. They didn't have faith in anything basically that have to do with like a plan step by step and opening it up. In the US, no one could decide on any goals for ventilators or masks or supply or It was basically a blame game, and you couldn't put up any objectives that you believed in. In China, it was brutal lockdowns. They didn't know what to do. To be fair, it was also there where everything started. So it had to be more panic-oriented, maybe. So if we go to in the mid of the corona curve, in EU, they actually started to have a unified response, which is quite interesting. And in the US, they invoked the Defense of Production Act for producing ventilators, which is also very interesting. And in China, they open up step by step in an environment, very controlled and very systematic. So they started to have faith actually in the objectives. When it comes to higher purpose, early in the curve, EU, they were actually in the middle of Brexit, breaking down everything, the whole idea behind EU, and increased protectionism with Hungary and many other countries, and no post-corona focus whatsoever. In the US, no one could decide on support to the society, the unemployed, and so forth. In China, they tried to preserve the power for the ruling elite, while in the partly into the curve, EU suddenly started talking about the idea behind EU. They made decisions with support packages that no one believed was possible just a month ago. And in the US, it's increased systematic responsibility, focusing on mitigating the consequences on the economy. In the US, we do things that never were done before to support people, because we need actually to survive as a civilization. We need to go back to our root, the founding fathers of the United States of America. It's obvious how it drives a change that is not right or left wing. It has to happen, otherwise it crashes. In China, they become the world leader and a role model, which serves their higher purpose quite well, actually. Then we have fear. In EU, no one were willing to approve any uncertified or non-certified use of protective equipment, which is absolutely stupid. People died instead. In the US, they were not willing to restrict social interaction, or bulk purchasing, to prohibit bulk purchasing, or to prohibit pricing on consumer goods. And in China, they denied the total existence, actually. A bit into the curve, in EU, suddenly you could use non-traditional material, which is very weird. And in US, we accept forced restriction in social interactions, laws against pricing, and companies forbidding bulk purchase. It's fantastic. That is unbelievable that is happening. And in China, total openness. Uncertainty then, how about uncertainty? Well, when it comes to uncertainty, I would say that in EU, they were very bad in forecasting. And in US, they couldn't really decide on any goal for testing, when testing is imperative for dealing with uncertainty. And in China, well, they had lack of knowledge. That is, of course, impossible to deal with. A little bit into the curve, EU have discussions that are ongoing, and they're better in forecasting. And what's really interesting, they complement the forecast with degree of uncertainty, just as you should handle it. So when you deal with uncertainty, you have to grade the level of uncertainty and the probability and combine them. And this is quite hard for most people to cope with, and it's hard to communicate, but it's absolutely necessary. In US, we actually start to test things now, which is the best approach to deal with uncertainty. And in China, they have been doing that for quite some time, including tracking and social distancing in a very, very sophisticated way. So there are questions about capabilities and skills I see here in the chat. I will come back to that, actually, to point out a few things for you. Before we do that, and please continue to post things in the chat and in the Q&A, and Johannes will also ask all questions. He will answer all questions and also post in the chat what's floating up. If we have a look at the coronavirus trajectories, we can see that it's very differently handled. And you can see on the US, the curve is not flattering right now, unfortunately. And it's grown quite fast. South Korea have flattering it very quickly, Singapore too. And it's interesting if we have a look at the capabilities. So if we have a look at the aspiration for radical innovation in South Korea, Singapore, and United States, they are organized in a way. So in South Korea and in Singapore, you have the aspiration of dealing with radical innovation and do things fast and react on that. And if you have a look at the capabilities, now to the chat box question here, if you have a look to the left on the slide, you see the different correlated capability for handling radical innovation from our database and from the research we published at IEEE. You can see how the different regions is scoring. So US has lower aspiration and lower capabilities for handling radical innovation when it comes to the industry. And the same goes, but in the opposite direction with South Korea and Singapore. That's also why they can handling things. They can get tracking in place immediately. They can produce masks immediately. They can produce ventilators immediately. They can react in clusters, what we call superclusters, immediately. That's why. So if we want to be prepared for change, and it will be change, not just this pandemic, it will be change in climate, in oil price, renewable energy, a lot of things happening right now. We will have a new normal with new way of working, online, more interaction, more global. Well, we need to build the capability for radical innovation, but we also need to work on the aspiration, which is quite much about coaching. So when we assess organization, we assess them on an overall level, and then in each and one of the units. We have done up to 800 units in one Global 100 company, for instance. Then we can see immediately where you have the aspiration and the capability for handling incremental and radical or both, and how you can take advantage of this knowledge and train the companies to move it up to the level where you want to have it, and how you can map it also to your portfolio, and also to the degree of uncertainty in the surrounding world. So I have a short interview I would like to show to you with the general manager of the flight operator SAS. And he's reporting to the CEO. He's living here in New York, actually. And I got him on a video recording the other day where he speaks about this tremendously brutal situation. They fired or let off 90% of all employees, or permitted, rightly, to be more precisely, they permitted 90%. And they have a very strong higher purpose, and they find new way actually now of using the organization and prepare for the time after Corona. And they do a fantastic job. So I would like you to invite you to listening to this interview. Hello, Max, and welcome.
Hello.
As the SAS General Manager Americas, could you please tell me about the initiative on how to support healthcare in the fight against the corona?
Yeah, sure. So as we all know, we're in this really extraordinary and challenging situation that impacts us all in many different ways. And use this competence.
Oh, I understand that I have to pay for the beginning. Sorry for that. SAS General Manager Americas, could you please tell me about the initiative on how to support healthcare in the fight against the corona?
Yeah, sure. So as we all know, we're in this really extraordinary and challenging situation that impacts us all in many different ways. And as an airline, obviously, it's a huge challenge where demand for air travel basically overnight almost totally vanished, which then means that a large part of our organization don't have work at the moment. And that goes, for instance, for our cabin crew. And if we look at our cabin crew, you can see that they have a profile, competence, and experience, which in a crisis like this is really useful and relevant. You're looking at how to treat customers, caring for other people, having experience to calmly and methodically handle crisis situation, emergencies, but also add on that some basic medical education. So in this situation, we from SS started thinking, how can we, as an employer, take care of our employees in the best possible way, and at the same time use this competence and experience for the good of the society. And that then led to actually a number of different initiatives that we're doing today, especially within the healthcare sector. And one of the initiatives actually started yesterday on March 30th. And it's an initiative together with Sophia Hemmet University, who is now shaping a 3-day online course to add competence and educate our cabin crew. So they are then, after this 3-day course, prepared to step out in the society and help a very constrained and pressured situation within the healthcare industry, such as hospitals, support doctors, nurses, and so forth. And it's also together with the human capital's company Novare, and also that they will then help these people that voluntarily signed up for this to find jobs in our society to then help people in need. And it's also facilitated and helped by the Wallenberg Foundation, who is supporting these kind of initiatives as well.
So why is this important for you and for SIS? In what way?
I mean, partly as an employer, of course, we have a responsibility and we care for our employees as much as possible. And there's also a situation where they temporarily don't have work, but our belief and ambition and hope is, of course, that they will soon be restarting their normal job, and for instance, as cabin crew. So of course, there's this dimension of being an employer and taking care of our employees, but also looking at SS' role in the society. I think it's clear from our perspective that we have a crucial function and the meaning in the society and infrastructure in Scandinavia. And it's not only to make sure in crisis like this that our key staff with their competence is used in a situation like this, but also looking at, for instance, the freight business, having medical equipment or corona tests be flown from different locations, or working with rescue flights to bring Scandinavians back home to their home country. So we do see this as a part of our role in the society and the meaning that SS has to Scandinavia.
So what advice would you like to give to other leaders that would like to pull something similar off? What should you think of before you do something quite brave, actually, as you have done?
No, I think obviously for every leader and every business in a crisis like this, there are some fundamental critical business needs that you need to probably take care of. It could be cost, it could be safety, and so forth. But in addition to that, obviously situations like this do open up possibilities to actually look in different directions that you normally don't do. And I think one key here is to look for partnerships, for other companies in other sectors that combined and jointly can find new solutions that adds new value that you normally perhaps don't do. So be able to look above the critical needs here and now, of course, tend to those, but also look at finding strong partnerships that you can add value in different ways.
Oh, that's really great advice. So thank you so much for being with us, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Magnus. You too.
All right. Thank you, Max. It was great having you.
Hello, Max.
So
Hello.
the problem is not the lack of ideas. The problem is what you do with them. And I will jump into more on capabilities and the correlation between aspiration, capability, and financials. And there are a few things in the chat about that as well. So soon I will come back, pick that up. Before I do that, this is a slide from one of my favorite professors. It is Gary Hamel. So, and I have borrowed these slides and I've shown it many times, and now it makes sense, or it actually made sense many, many decades. But people do not listen to this message. That's my experience. So first you're overconfident, and we've been that in the whole world. Then it suddenly collapsed, too little, too late, ongoing decline, and then it's boom, gone. This is exactly where we are right now. And that's how it is. There's only one way out of that, and that is to organize radical change. There is no shortcuts. Impossible. When I show this, and I have done this so many times, and I think it's like 20 years old, people don't believe it because they're so confident. No, we don't have any problems. No, we have so many things to do. We are being busy by being busy, or we're having meeting because we have meetings, instead of focusing on getting this shit done. Excuse the French, because that's exactly what it's about. Get it done, and you need to organize for that, and that is possible, and I will go into that into more details. So now it's actually time to take control and mitigate uncertainty and collaborate in clusters, experiment and learn, and adapt to the new normal. And the new normal, as we see it's happening right now, is that we will have revised healthcare policies, most likely revised governmental policy generally, new way of working. We will have superclusters, automation boost that will be tremendous. We will also have rebuilding supply chain, and we will most likely, unfortunately, have pockets of protectionism. And the idea is actually to mitigate risk by balancing the explorative and the explorate way of working, the radical with incremental, to do both at the same time and organize for that. Everything is an S-curve. It has a beginning, a grow, and a mature and a fading away stage, and that's how things are. Then you need to find a way of jumping to and leapfrog to a new S-curve and a new S-curve, while you still stick around in the one you have, making business. We use a framework called the Horizons, and there has been some criticism lately, which I'm very, very happy it is, because it's misused. It's heavily misused, actually. Horizons have nothing to do with time at all. It didn't have from the beginning 99, and it will never have for the future either. It's actually rather a degree on uncertainty. So in the first horizon, you're very certain, you can do predictions that is linked to cash. In the third horizon, it's very uncertain, and you can do insights and learnings, and you can experiment in the partly unknown in the second horizon. And now to go back to one of the questions that we got in the chat about data, linking innovation and profit and growth. So there's a very large study. It's made 2010, and they have done, and it's Booz Allen and PwC, and they have done studies until 2018. So it's a very, very well documented research project that shows that if you have a coherent innovation strategy, you earn more, 22% more money, and you grow 8% faster. Saying that, if you don't have an innovation strategy at all, you actually have 45% higher profit, and the revenue growth is actually as much as 30%. That's quite cool. So in the first graph to the left, you can see the difference between if you have a strategy in place or not. And on the right-hand side, if you have a strategy and a coherent strategy, meaning that you have the right capabilities. And that's the whole point. And you can't know that. You need to assess if you have the right capabilities. And if you have, you earn more, you grow faster, and in these turbulent times, you survive and come back and will most likely grow even more. If you don't have that in place, you will look for a black cat in a black room and you will not find it, basically. You need a culture, you need a structure, and you need action to be able to cope with times like this. And the culture is the right aspiration, that you want to do things, the right leadership, the right supporting values, the right capabilities, and the structure that you have the scenarios in place. You have a fast innovation management system with clear KPIs. You add the pre-stage gated funnel where you feed in all the things into to innovation process or development process. Iteration over decision points and feedback loops is absolutely essential. And we also know that most companies do not have that. And if you introduce that, just by doing that, you actually increase your speed with up to 30%. And that is actually the theme for the next webinar that you can sign up for. And maybe, Johannes, if you can post a link to that seminar in the chat box that is focusing on that. Then we have the acting part. And the acting part is to establish in these turbulent times a command center to quantify predictions with probability and degree of uncertainty, to start to work with testing, learning, and hypotheses, and to build and coach for the right capabilities, leadership, and aspiration. And if we have a quick look at to how to create a high-speed, fast innovation process, you have to add the pipeline feeders, and this is lacking in most large corporations, also mid-sized corporations. In small corporation, you can compensate it with an entrepreneur or an innovator. Unfortunately, that's not especially scalable. It's necessary in the beginning, though. Then you can handle the level of uncertainty by actually mapping it to horizons and work with experimenting and prototyping. And you can feed it into testing in tires, near field market test, feed it out, working with the development ops. And this is like a high level how you can deal with that. But the real trick is to find what's underneath in the culture, the capability and the leadership. And for that, we use a framework. You can find my books on Amazon, Assessing and Measuring Business Innovation. There you can find all the science. Everything is published. You can read the books. And maybe, Johannes, if you can send in the chat box the link to Amazon and the books, that would be great. So there you can go back actually and have a look at how you can work with that. And what we learned in the horizons is that in the first horizon, it's the core. It's about explosive and use incremental innovation, and it's the capabilities there that is most important is actually how you set goals. And that might sound easy. It's not, because working with goal setting also means that you coach for goals, and it's pretty hard. And you need also to be pretty insightful about the market change and technology shifts. And we see many of the incremental companies, they do not have this in place, actually. Don't have even the capabilities for being incremental. That's absolutely necessary. In the second horizon, it's about expanding and look for somewhere adjacent possibilities. And capabilities here is to challenge and grow the new, and to understand users, related technology, organizing in platforms, and so forth. And all of that you can find also in the books if you like to, or on the website. You find quite many of our blog posts there where you can do like much deeper dive into that. In the third horizon, it's about exploring. It's about mapping future scenarios, and of course capability for scenario building. It's about co-creation, open innovation, and so forth. So we have someone asking here for the number of attendees in the webinar. I think it's a little bit over 500 people this time. All right. So let's go for the next one here. Some cornerstones of handling change and how you should organize your organization actually for be responsive to post-corona. And you can start at work already now. Strategy need to be aligned between the ability and aspiration. What do I want and how do I achieve that? It sounds easy. It's not statistically. It's not. It's always a gap there, because when you go many layers down, level 2 might work eventually, best case. Level 3, no. The problem starts there. And the other way, of course, as well, from grassroots level, you might have things that are actually would support a strategy, but it's not coming up to level 2 and level 1. And you need to align with the purpose and the vision, and also create scenarios. And then it comes to the portfolio part, which is about managing the balance between the incremental and the radical. That's risk mitigating, to be able to act on what's here and now and plan for the future. Right now, I think everybody needs to plan for post-corona. You can just let go of all the improvement programs. It will not help you right now, which is all the situation, but that's how it is. And then it will go back to new normal, where you have to improve the new innovation that you come up with. And that was also the case during the industrialism and what's happened after the depression, that we built out the power grids, for instance. It was super dangerous. No one knew how the heck it should work. It was really dangerous. Should it be AC? Should it be DC? What voltage? It was a lot of experimentation that wouldn't be allowed today, because after that we start with incremental innovation. But I think everybody's pretty happy for the industrial revolution and how we created the power grids and power supply across the whole world. And then you have the next part, which is about execution, how to govern the processes, how to measure them, to have the right operation model with resource allocation, and so forth. And also, of course, building the right culture and the right leadership to handle the balance between radical and incremental innovation. So how does these things go together then? It goes together that you have an external outlook. And for that, we recommend pestle analysis. We also have tools for that, where we have a very big database where we collect data around key drivers. And we have been able to foresee quite many dramatical changes, like a refugee wave, for instance. And it is possible to foresee. We did foresee a pandemic, not a corona, of course, but we did foresee that in a number of our client cases. And many have done that, I should tell that. So by working with that and combine that with scenarios and link that to the internal weak and strengths, which you can do with we use our 360 assessment for that. But you need to assess it somehow. And then you link that to the purpose, the vision, and the mission, and the corporate strategy, the goals for innovation, and link that to strategic initiatives. And then you can bring that into your innovation portfolio and your innovation management system. And that's exactly how everything goes together. So if we have a look at how the innovation management system works, quite briefly, it is about having a process from ideation to commercialization, and it has to have iterations, very important. And you need to pre-assess and post-assess the culture, the leadership, and the capabilities. Otherwise, it will get stuck. Nothing will happen, basically. You can transform all of those things into a transformation plan, where you start with the assess. It takes a few days. You create a baseline, you take the right action and close the gaps. You work in many iterations to build the capabilities, and then you reassess. Normally, I would say this is like 6 to 24 months. Right now, this might be possible in 3 months due to the extreme pressure. And that will not happen the coming 50 years, is my guess, or the coming 25 years. We will see crisis, but not of this magnitude, I guess. I don't hope so. And if we will, it will be about pollution and global warming. So I'm happy to take a few questions as well. And before I do that, and you can just post them into the Q&A or into the chat. How we can support you guys is that we work with established command centers all over the world, from governments to companies. We also realign for the new normal, and we have specific programs in actually in that. We also have implementing programs of way of working. How do you work remotely? How you lead teams? How you use tools? Collaboration, very hands-on. Scenario analysis, we do that in many industries, and we have tools and data for that as well. We do coaching, training, and we're leading change projects as well. And everything is data-driven. We typically assess, and then based on that, we carve out the plan. So that is basically how we can support you in way of working. So there is a question here about, let's see, there's a question about PestLed 360. Yes, that is a tool that we use. We have created we think maybe the largest database in the world because it's based on our licensed practitioners in 45 countries. So we have consultancy companies and independents in 45 countries that is feeding in data. And collectively, we work with creating very big databases. And we've been able to do that for some time and using AI to map things out. That was a question about that. And how to provide leadership in given resources to Horizon 2 and 3. That's a very interesting question. Let me pick that up. So we have 5 ways of leading. We call it the spirit staircase. We call it, which is working step by step towards a very defined goal. The fertile field, the gardener, letting things grow. The cauldron, the entrepreneurial style, where you throw things into a cauldron and see what's happening. We have the Pac-Man, acquiring for getting the knowledge or the capability or the insights or the product or the IP, and have an explorer, not putting anything, any demand except insights and learning. So if you want to work in the third horizon, you need to have an explorative way of leading, where you say to people, the important is not the cash, the important is to learn. But when you have something, you should demand to start a prototype, and then you move it into the second horizon, where you need the cauldron or the fertile field leader. Maybe the Pac-Man to acquire things. And when you see it's working, you actually close yourself and become very protagonistic. While in the third horizon, you need to have more open leadership and be more open to people. Otherwise, you don't get anything. So there is more like creating the open environment. But open innovation always fail when it comes to the second stage, because then someone take it from you. But if you actually open up in the beginning, create a common market and a common insight, a common standard, then you move it into second horizon, and then from there you accelerate. You put up the barriers, and you start to produce in the first horizon, where you have the spirit staircase leadership style. That is a very efficient way of working. A good example is actually Ericsson and Nokia, how they beat Huawei in 5G. Why? Because they decided to go together and create a new standard. And Huawei decided to be on the outside, and they lost due to that, actually. So they lost out because they didn't want to create a common standard. So Ericsson and Nokia, that are head competitors, they won from actually opening up and creating an open standard. This is quite common, a pattern, actually. So we have a few other questions here about, do you see any variations in innovation levels across geographies? Yes, we do. So as I pointed out, South Korea and Singapore has very strong in both incremental and radical innovation, generally speaking. In China, they outperform in radical innovation when it comes to larger corporations, actually, and incremental. When it comes to small, it's not the case. They are quite unsophisticated, actually. In the US, it's generally speaking quite low. There are a few exceptions, but statistically, US score pretty low. It's score in par with Sweden, and maybe a little bit less. Sweden think that they always score high because it's a lot of research out there and top lists that are based on macro key drivers like number of patents, and then Sweden scores very well. But when it comes to micro data, it doesn't. And Switzerland doesn't either, actually. And both Switzerland and Sweden are scoring very high on macro level, but not on industrial level. So on industrial level, if I point out, is actually Southeast Asia, And there are also a few other countries that are scoring high, actually in Africa, which is quite interesting. So, and Israel is scoring, I would say, among the highest as well. Do we have any more questions here? Yeah, it's a lot of questions. Maybe I should actually mention that we have something called Innovation IQ, where we actually assess countries and organization and compare and contrast. And then we have one more question. Do you have examples of Innovation 360 collaborating with other innovation practitioners, having different capabilities for more way to increase rewards from innovation enterprises? Yeah, we collaborate with quite many, and we have a program for clients called Corporate Partnership. We have a program for universities called Educational Partnership, and then we have a gold and silver partnership for consultancy companies. So we typically we have a program where you can accredite and go into partnership to get access to what we do. So we are very collaborative, and we like that as a way of creating more together, actually. So then we have one here, industry sectors which are under disruption. Yeah, it's a good one. Actually, the mining industry is under enormous disruption since 10 years ago, and maybe 5. And they are actually industry scoring highest at the moment, which is very, very interesting. They have went from a very low innovation capability level to actually to be the highest when you measure industries. And then we have a question: how does Agile and Scrum fit in? Yeah, Agile and Scrum is based on the assumption that you can slice up things in sprints, and that's good. And here is the news. When you work with innovation from Horizon 3 to Horizon 1, in Horizon 3, you deal with the unknown. In Horizon 1, you deal with the known. In the unknown, you have to deal with both that you have a high degree of uncertainty, and you have also an infinite number of ways of doing things. And the thing is that you can't divide uncertainty and you can't divide infinity, which means that Agile method doesn't work for Horizon 3, basically. It's not made for that. It's made for dealing with Horizon 1, where you know things and you can do it tremendously efficient. And therefore you create a framework like SIF and other things like that. The thing here is that in Horizon 1, I recommend to use DevOps, Agile, XP, and stuff like that if you're into tech. While in Horizon 3 doesn't work especially good, and design thinking is very efficient in the second horizon. But if you don't have a user, you can't use that. So it's different tools actually for different horizons, basically. And then we have how to deal with fear of failure. Yeah, that's a good one. So we are very close to the end of this call. So I will be able to take 1 or 2 more questions. So how do you deal with fear of failure? Yeah, so it's interesting because fear of failure could be 2 things. Either you're fear of failure or you are fear of not succeed. And it's 2 sides of the same coin. And if you're fear of not succeeding, you need to find out the way to make people to succeed. And if you're fear of failure, you need to find a way to turn failure into lessons learned. And it's about leadership and culture. And there are a good number of ways of doing that. The worst way of handling it is a reward system that are extrinsic with money. That is not working at all. It has to be linked to intrinsic rewards. So turn failure into lessons learned, and coaching on career path for handling that you might fear of not succeeding is the way that you can do it. So very good, excellent. A lot of really good questions here. So I think that we are all done for today.